Thanks for joining us. I'm Koki Sabates with JCAV News, and today we'll be talking about autism with Mr. Sean Swindler, who is the Director of Community Program Development and Evaluation for the Kansas Center for Autism Research and Training. Thanks for joining us today. Well, my first question for you is, how did you get involved with autism-based research and work with KCART?
Well, I've actually worked with people with developmental disabilities for almost 20 years professionally, and about 5 years ago, my son was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is on the autism spectrum, and so having been involved with people with developmental disabilities and kind of been in that field, that seemed like a natural next step would be to get involved in that aspect.
And so how exactly is autism classified?
We know autism is a neurological disability, and that means that there are differences in the brain structure and the way the brain processes information, and that impacts you from the time you're very young with autism in terms of how you learn and how you perceive information, and it goes on, and that of course impacts you as you get older and as you learn to communicate and participate in the world.
So how exactly does it change throughout a person's life? It's not, is it necessarily a biological change, or is it just the way that the mind develops and it perceives things differently throughout their life?
Well, that's a really good question. The one thing that we know through research that can really improve outcomes for people with autism is intensive early intervention. Because when you do that intensive early intervention, that 20 to 30 hours a week of intensive work with a child at, let's say, age 2 to 5, who has autism, you're actually remapping the brain. You're actually teaching the brain these new neural pathways that didn't exist previously to interact with the world, to learn how to be reciprocal in communication, etc. And by doing that, you drastically improve outcomes for kids with autism. It's a similar process that we know that when you learn music or a language when you're really young, it's a lot easier to learn than it is if you take it up as an adult. Well, it's the same for kids with autism. If you learn the eye contact and reciprocal play and interacting with the world, you can learn that and overcome some of the differences that you have in the way your brain processes information.
That's amazing. I had no idea that was a way to, I guess, would it be treating autism, or?
It isn't a way to treat autism. You can't cure autism, but you can drastically improve the outcomes for kids through that intensive early intervention. And that's one of the reasons why the research that we do at KU and at KCART about autism is really focused on, one of the pieces is focusing on early identification. Because the earlier we can identify a child has autism, the earlier we can start early intervention services.
So what exactly are earlier intervention services?
That would be working with a child to, through a technique called applied behavioral analysis, working with a child one-on-one to practice all of those things that tend to come naturally for other children, attending to information, playing with a teacher or playing with another child, learning to kind of exchange that kind of social reciprocity that really helps you interact with the world.
Wow, so it's almost like physical therapy for the mind in
exactly.
a social sense.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. So are those some services offered by KCART?
KCART has what's called the Autism Training Program, and it's a contract with the state of Kansas, and the purpose is to train people to provide services for the Kansas Early Intervention Autism Waiver, and also train people to provide services for insurance providers that offer autism services. And that training program is also open to parents and caregivers, grandparents, for free to learn how to do some of that training and interaction with your child with autism.
That's wonderful. So how do they go about finding information on how to participate in that?
If you go on our website, kcart.ku.edu, there will be information about that training program.
That's wonderful. Okay. And so what, at KCART you do research based on autism. What is some of the current research going on between the link with autism?
One of the purposes of KCART was to do pilot research and promote some very new and exciting research to be done here in Kansas. So we have what are called discovery grants that KCART gives out to KU researchers, and these are to look at promising new avenues for conducting research. Some examples would be looking at some epigenetic causes of autism. That is, what are some factors that can actually change the gene during early development that could lead to autism. Others looking at what do the immune systems of kids with autism look like. Another very exciting research is KU researchers found that when you measure the pupil size of kids with autism, there's a difference in pupil size. And there are a lot of complex medical reasons for that. But how we're now going to pilot it in the clinics at the Center for Child Health and Development, so that when some of the 800 kids a year that come for an autism diagnosis come in, we can see, is that a predictor of having autism? Because if you can get that physical predictor, you are going to be much more able to screen kids for possibly having autism, and again, do that much earlier intervention.
Wow. So what are the earlier, is that, so there's physical traits to it, or is it?
Well, there's really no physical traits. Right now, when you have an autism diagnosis, the way we do it at KU is we have a multidisciplinary team that's made up of a developmental pediatrician, a psychologist, possibly an occupational therapist or a speech pathologist, and they do some proven measures to look at how the child responds to interaction and social play, and how you score on those measures, plus based on what the developmental pediatrician looks at in terms of the history, can help diagnose autism. But there's really no biological or physical marker for autism, like there are for some other disabilities. And so finding those clues that say this child has a high likelihood of having autism, it would be very helpful in getting them in for that full diagnosis.
Wonderful. So how has the need for research-based autism training changed in the past 15 or so years?
Well, the number one thing that we're focused on is the CDC at the end of March came out with a new autism number that shows that 1 in 88 children has autism. And since it impacts boys 75% of the time, 1 in 54 boys has autism. And it's not just the fact that we're better at identifying autism. There really is something that we need to be researching about the cause of autism. But further than that, KCART is really committed to finding out better ways to treat autism and to manage autism, because these 1 in 88 children are going to go to school, they're going to grow up, they're going to need jobs, and so that lifespan approach, looking at what are some good educational interventions, what are some educational interventions to teach social skills, what are some interventions that can assist a person with autism to get a job or to be able to function in the community. All of those are things we're real interested in pursuing.
Wonderful. And so is that something that viewers and guests at the conference can look into, finding those research-based training sessions and things like that, and learning about it across the lifespan?
And KCART does do trainings and workshops throughout the year that address some of those areas I just suggested. And really, what we're finding out is this is all very emerging, because we know that our 1 in 88 kids we're identifying now, well, in 15 to 18 years, they're going to be adults. And so really, as we've looked at all of this early intervention, we're now seeing an increased focus on looking at what does it look like in high school? What does it look like in college? What does it look like as children become adults? And what are the best ways to manage that?
Is it because not only do people just change as they get older, but for someone with every person who has autism, it could be different. Is that correct?
Yeah, autism is a very broad spectrum. There are commonalities among all people with autism, but it's a very broad spectrum, and so there are, you know, different. People with autism are very different and very varied in what their needs are, and likewise families and the choices that people make for their lifestyle or for what they want to do in their life are different. And, you know, one of the philosophies in general for all people with disabilities is that just because you have a disability doesn't mean you should be limited in your choices or limited in what you can accomplish. And that same thing applies for people with autism.
Wonderful. So why do you feel that it's important to be educated about autism over the course of the life?
Well, when you see that 1 in 88 kids has autism, autism touches almost every person in our society. Almost everybody knows somebody with autism, knows if maybe has a family member. And if that's not the case, if you are in any profession, whether it's nursing or education or law enforcement or the medical profession, just about any profession that interacts with a large number of people, you are going to encounter people with autism or families that are impacted by autism. So understanding autism is actually really important for those professions.
So anyone is really encouraged to come to the conference?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have sessions we really do try to approach from a lifespan standpoint. We have sessions on early intervention. We have sessions on early childhood, on behavior, on employment, on community living, sessions geared to young adults with autism to help them become more independent, sessions regarding public policy and legislation that impacts people with autism.
Wonderful. And they can actually, people who go to the conference can actually get education credit for it, continuing education credit.
Yeah, different professions, psychology, nursing, etc. We make sure there are CEUs available.
And how does working with JCCC help this conference get on its feet and just a well-rounded thing?
Well, we've really appreciated our partnership with JCCC. We feel like it's almost a perfect partnership in terms of reaching out to the community, because the JCCC's strength in reaching out to a wide variety of students, a wide variety of people who have continuing education needs, really matches what we would like to do with regard to disseminating information and research widely. Also, JCCC has a fabulous reputation for being a leader in working with students who have disabilities, including autism, and so their commitment to working with that population has really made possible this partnership and this conference.
Great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add about the conference or about autism at all?
Oh, and you can find out about the Autism Conference by going to kansasautismconference.org and at KCART at kcart.ku.edu.
Wonderful. And we'll have those slides up at the end of our segment so you can check out those links and sign up for the conference and find more about KCART. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you so much, Mr. Swindler, for coming in. I'm Koki Sabates for JCAV News.